Good evening and welcome to another Otterbein Debate. Tonight we are looking at the proposition that the United States federal government should provide free college tuition to its citizens. Arguing on the affirmative is Jack Novak, who's a senior history major, and arguing against the resolution is Labra, who's a sophomore political science major. Our judges this evening are Jefferson Blackburn Smith, who's Vice President of Enrollment Management here at Otterbein, Professor of English, former Tannen Cardinal Advisor Jim Gorman, and Professor of Communication Carrie Strayer. We also have two student judges, a junior public relations and sports communication minor Jacob Brandwine, and sophomore history education major Max Hoffman. The format for the debate is each debater will have 2 4-minute constructive speeches. This will be followed by a cross-examination period. Then they will each have 4-minute rebuttal speeches, again followed by a cross-examination. Then they will each have a 2-minute summary speech. If we're ready to begin, or Jack.
Okay, thank you for being here, everybody. So the resolution today asks us whether the United States federal government should provide college tuition for all of its citizens. I believe that in the affirmative that it should. The 3 reasons why we should do this are 1, the economic impact, 2, to create a more equitable society, and 3, because we've already determined that there's a right to education that exists that needs to be expanded for the modern economy. Going to the economic impact, there's currently a $1.4 trillion student loan debt, which is held by 44.2 million Americans. And not only is there an incredibly high student loan debt rate, but the government's actually profiting off of this, and they're set to generate $110 billion over the next 10 years from this debt. The government should not be generating revenue from students who are investing in their future. The government should be investing in its citizens. Additionally, we know that college graduates benefit the economy. In 2015, the unemployment rate for people with bachelor's degrees was less than half of the rate of unemployment for people who had no college experience, with bachelor degree holders only having an unemployment rate of 3.2%. On average, people with college degrees earn $17,000 more per year, and in their lifetime will make over $1 million. That's money that gets generated back into the economy, that goes to start businesses, that gets invested in the stock market, and helps create a stronger economy. The second reason why we need to have a federal system that provides college tuition for citizens is because it creates a more equitable society. The federal system ensures that college education will be equitable, merit-based, and attainable for all people. Many people, especially from lower classes today, currently choose not to go to college, not because they're unable to academically, but because of the fear of taking on massive amounts of debt. And that should not be a reason why people are strayed away from investing in their education. If we believe that we live in a meritocracy where the American dream is achievable, then we need to have a system that provides that as well. We also know that education increases our democracy. People with higher levels of education are more likely to vote, and in doing that, we have a more participatory democracy, which is strong for everybody. We've also already determined that there is a right to education in the United States. Since the inception of the United States, the government has supported and helped to fund public education. And most notably, in 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was passed as part of Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty, which has been the most far-reaching federal legislation affecting education so far that's been passed. But what this did was it ensured that all people would have access to a high school diploma. And while that was necessary in 1865 to ensure a higher level of education than had existed before in order to participate in the economy that existed in the 1960s, now we need to expand on that view and modernize our view of our right to education and expand it to fit the modern economy, which would extend it to undergraduate education. To go over how this would be funded, there have been many proposals put in place, but the one that I think suits us the best would be some form of a Robin Hood tax, which would specifically only tax people on Wall Street. So it's not going to affect all of the all American citizens. It would only affect Wall Street trades. And so the plan that has been proposed in Bernie Sanders' bill was a 0.5% tax on stock trades, a 0.1% fee on bonds, and a 0.005% tax on derivatives trades, which are more dangerous trades that they make. And they've determined that this would more than cover the cost of a college education for all citizens.
I will start by restating the resolution, which states that the federal government should provide free tuition to all citizens. I believe that it shouldn't at a federal level, but at a state level. But I will start off by saying that if we provide free tuition to all citizens, that it's going to hurt the quality of education. It's going to hurt the quality of education because it's going to increase the number of students. Studies show that it's bad for large amount of kids in a classroom. So there are many benefits to smaller classrooms. So benefits are, so students choose colleges that have a lower student-to-teacher ratio, including smaller classes where students can receive individual attention from instructors, accommodation of different learning and teaching styles. In a smaller classroom environment, there is a much greater opportunity for the teacher to be directly involved with the student. Additionally, instructors of small classes often enjoy lighter workloads than their counterparts at larger universities, which means that the coursework can be personally delivered and graded by the instructor instead of relying on teacher assistants or other students for help. Students in smaller classrooms are also less likely to get lost in the system when surrounded by hundreds of other students in a large class. And with all of this, they get attention from the professor as well. And according to an openeducationdatabase.org, Ivy League schools like Harvard and Yale have a 7-to-1 teacher-student ratio, while other schools average about 20-to-1 student-teacher ratio. And the schools with the highest student-to-teacher ratio is South New Hampshire University with a 30-to-1, with only a 58% graduation rate. So if we add more students to the system, classes will get larger and students will not have the education they deserve, and they'll go to private colleges or the graduation rate will lower and students will still be in debt. And if we do decide to provide free tuition, it should not be provided by the federal government, but by the state. A state plan is better than the federal government. States are already looking at it. So the New York plan, according to NewYork.gov, New York has the Excelsior Scholarship, which allows students to attend SUNY or CUNY colleges for free. A SUNY college is a state university of New York, has a system of 88,000 faculty members and about 8,000 degrees and certificate programs overall, and a $10.7 billion budget, and expands over 64 different colleges. A CUNY University, which is a city university of New York, consists of 3 types of institutions, which is senior colleges that grant bachelor degrees and occasionally master's and associate's degrees. Community colleges grant, again, associate's degrees, and graduate or professional schools. As of 2009, CUNY is the United States' largest urban public university with an enrollment of over 270,000 students. So why shouldn't the federal government pay for it? With the current administration, the topic will never get passed at a federal level. They can't agree on health care, DACA, let alone free higher education, which is why having it at a state level is better. And an overlap of responsibilities can lead to lack of accountability between the 2 levels. And again, we wouldn't have free college tuition, which is why at a state level is better, but I think that overall we shouldn't have it because of the class sizes. Thank you.
So isn't it true that in the New York State plan that people who take advantage of the Excelsior scholarship also have to remain in state?
Yes.
Do you think that if there's a stipulation on people remaining where they get their education, that creates some type of imbalance?
No, because that again increases the state's economy. So the state's investing in their citizens, which will eventually go back into the system to help more of its citizens. And New York is pretty big. I mean, you can get a lot of jobs in New York. So I don't think that that's a big issue.
So you don't think that mobility after graduating college is important?
No.
Okay. Do you have any questions?
So you mentioned the debt problem. With your plan, what do you plan to do with the current debt problem?
Well, the resolution doesn't do anything to talk about the current debt problem. I do agree that something needs to be done to address that, specifically to lower the current interest rates on student loans that are active right now, but that's not part of this resolution.
Okay. But even if we don't have this plan, like students are already going to college and are willing to get into debt, right? Because they need a higher education. So you think that students will actually take advantage of this free tuition?
Yes, I can't imagine why people wouldn't take advantage of a system that allowed them to go to college for free. Like, I would.
But can't you agree
I
that
would
some
absolutely do that.
students with a full ride drop out anyway, right?
People drop out, but there are a number of reasons why people drop out of college.
Okay. And how can you ensure that it'll? Never mind.
Okay. Okay. So when I began, I'm going to address the contentions that my opponent made in her first speech, and then I'll reiterate some of the points that I made in my first speech. So she argued that instituting this would hurt the quality of education because it would increase the amount of students and thus increase the amount of classroom size. This is simply not true. There's no evidence that would show that suddenly enrollment would increase drastically. Yes, more people would probably apply to college, but that doesn't mean that suddenly everyone who applies is going to be accepted into college. It would create a merit-based system where people are getting in on their academic achievement, not on if it's affordable for their family or not. So I don't believe that that's true. Additionally, if we have more people who are educated, we'd probably also have more teachers. So I think that both of those points can be summed up there. But then to go to the state plan, I think a state plan doesn't ensure enough. One, it doesn't allow people to be mobile. So if you work or if you get a degree in a job that doesn't have a lot of offerings in your major in that area, for example, if I was a finance major here, there are jobs here, but there are much more opportunities in finance in places like New York and Chicago and California. So that a state system wouldn't really work if you don't have any type of mobility. So a federal system would ensure that education would be applied to all people equally, and it wouldn't have these weird strings attached that would only benefit some places rather than others. And so I'm going to go back and address some of my earlier points. And so I'll go back to the debt issue. So there's $1.48 trillion in student loan debt right now, and it is imperative that we make sure that this debt doesn't increase. People are also struggling to pay back their loans. There's a student loan delinquency rate of 11.2%. So that means that for 90 days or longer, people are defaulting on their student loans. The average student loan payment is $351, which is absolutely absurd. It's absurd to think that 18-year-old kids can take on the cost of housing, food, all of the bills that are associated with living somewhere, and to tack on a $351 monthly payment. It's absolutely unsustainable, and it's imperative that we change the system and make sure that students aren't going into debt over investing in themselves. Again, the government is supposed to invest in its citizens, not the other way around. Also, I think it's really important that we have a stronger democracy, and we know that people who have higher levels of education are more likely to vote, and we claim to have a really strong democracy in the United States, yet we have really low voter turnout compared to some of our allies, and we are also one of the few countries that doesn't ensure college education as part of being a citizen. So we're behind in all these ways. Additionally, in the way that I discussed paying for it, this is not like a radical idea, this tax system. This is also done in all of our allies. All of those countries have these same types of taxes. So this isn't some like radical plan that's going to have a negative effect on the economy. This will only do good things, and these things should have been done for dozens of years at this point.
I will start off by saying that, going on my opponent's first point with the quality of education, his rebuttal on my quality of education, he mentions that there's no evidence that there will be an increase in students applying for college, which kind of goes against his point on democracy, because he said that if more students go to college, then there will be an increase in democracy, which is kind of contradictory. And he also said that these systems will still be on a merit-based system, which means that if it's on a merit-based system, that students that are getting into college, they're already semi-educated about the government, that they're already voting. So the ones that actually need to get into college, the ones that actually need to further their education and be educated more about the government, politics, and stuff like that, aren't the ones that are getting educated, which means that more people aren't exactly going to vote. He also mentions that there's going to be, that if there's more education, that there's going to be an increase in teachers. Right, well, again, an increase in teachers will actually hurt the quality of education, because now, since we have an increase in students, we need an increase in teachers, and now we're just going to apply anyone to fill the spot. We're not going to go towards college's qualifications. We're going to, again, they're going to hire anyone who has like a master's degree, or anyone who has like the minimum requirement to actually be there. So again, it's going to hurt the quality of education, and the students aren't going to get the education that they deserve. So again, the debt is still 1.4 trillion, and he's not doing anything about that debt. And the resolution also states just free tuition. So his plan doesn't do anything for room and board, so there's still going to be the cost of room and board. Which is why I think that a state plan is better, because if there's a state plan, then students will stay at home, they can commute to school, which 70% already do, 70% stay in state. So again, the state, it's easier if it's state funded. Again, the federal government isn't going to do anything about it. This topic will never get passed. Like I mentioned, it's not going to, like healthcare and immigration, there are no agreements on those, let alone higher education. So, which is why having it at a state funded is better. Also, having it state funded has a more direct form of democracy. So the senators and representatives have less constituents. It's only like a few thousand instead of a few million. So it's easier to understand what their constituents want, as opposed to having to deal with millions of people in the entire government with a few representatives, which is why a state plan is better than a federal government. And for these reasons, you should vote for my ballot. Thank you.
Okay, so does the resolution ask us if we need to pass this immediately?
It doesn't, but if you're not going to pass it anytime soon, then what's the point of you even talking about it?
Do you think that 49 states are ready to go on passing a college for all plan individually today?
No, but it's already starting. So
because
again,
one
with
state?
It'll start with like the whole domino effect. So one state has started right now, so eventually states will pick up and they'll want to fund it for their students as well.
So your plan even doesn't need to be passed immediately, but the federal plan does.
I'm not saying that.
Under this current administration, that's the only one that applies.
So having it at a federal government means that no one has it. Having it at a state government means that some states are actually starting to do it, so that some students are actually, getting this free education, which again helps the debt, which is your point.
Do you have questions?
You mentioned the profit, that the government is profiting from this, but do you know where the profit is going towards, or to who it's being directed to?
We know the federal government is generating $110 billion over the next 10 years. We do not know how that money is being allocated.
Okay. Do you have another question?
So you mentioned the cost of room and board, but if people aren't going to college, aren't there still costs of renting an apartment or buying food? Aren't those same costs that you're associating with college applied to all people just generally?
I mean, some people live with their parents like I do, and I don't pay rent.
Okay, so you should just
Or
live with your
food.
parents forever if you don't go to college.
No, but if you're not going to college, you're obviously still probably staying with your parents and getting a job to help start to support yourself. So I think that statement is like wrong.
Okay, so I'm going to just reiterate a couple points that I've made so far. So the amount of debt that borrowers have right now is absolutely, it's almost insurmountable at this point. And with so many people not being able to pay their loans, then we have to recognize that the current model is failing. And a state system doesn't do a job of it doesn't do enough to actually benefit everybody, whereas a federal system would do that, and there is a strong plan on how that would be done. 44.2 million Americans hold debt right now, and that's absolutely unsustainable. We need to change the system to benefit students. And we've already determined that there is a right to education throughout United States history. We've determined that there's a right to an education. But now it's time that we expand on the scope of where we think that right ends. And rather than having it end at high school, we need to have it end at undergraduate school. We know that the modern economy necessitates people who are college educated, and we know that because people who are college educated are much more likely to be employed. That shows that our economy thrives on people who are college educated. And it's not sustainable to have a $1.5 trillion debt for students. That's not where people should be accruing debt throughout their lives. That's something that should be an investment that the government puts into its citizens. And we also know that it will create a more equitable system that would apply to all people, not just people in one state or another. A federal system ensures that all people receive the same benefits as everybody else. So I encourage you to vote for my plan. Thank you.
I will reiterate the resolution, which is that it should be federally, a federal government should should provide free tuition to all citizens, and I think that it's wrong that it's better at a state, that a state plan is better than a federal plan. Again, the current administration is never going to pass it. So since we already have New York doing it, we have a state that's already trying to minimize the debt, which is my opponent's point, and it's also going to increase the economy within New York because it's going to have more educated citizens. Again, it will increase the democracy there because more of their citizens will vote. And this plan is towards low-income families. So more lower-income families are going to have the opportunity to actually go to college and get an education, vote, and again, put that money back into the economy. And since New York is already doing this, a state plan is way better than a federal plan. If we rely just solely on the federal government, it might take years, it might take decades for it to actually pass. So even though there isn't a time limit on this right now, I think that even if one state's doing it right now, that's all we need for the rest of the states to follow along. And even if it might take 5 years for all of the states to do it, as long as the states are doing it right now, it's already started, which means that students are already going into this plan, the New York plan, and getting the education, getting the free education, and not adding on to the debt. So for this reason, I think that I should get the ballot today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think debaters deserve another round of applause for their efforts here. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank Otterbein TV and our audience and our judges for coming to this wonderful event and for supporting us all year. If the judges are ready, choose the card you think reflects your decision and hold it up for us. Peyton, oh wow, we have a 3-2 decision for the affirmative. So thank you all very much, appreciate it, and we'll see you again next time.